Hello, my creative collective. I finally have a face to the hands that are usually my tarot videos. So, this is another episode of the Alchemical Book Club. Welcome. This is Into Infinite. I'm Charlie, and I'm so grateful that you're here. So, let's dive in, shall we? Also, Alchemical Book Club. What the heck is it? If this is your first time watching this particular episode on the channel or this type of episode, it is a book club designed to give you some tools that you can put to immediate use on your journey and in your life as well. I really believe in highly practical tools that you can take with you and use. They are in service to your creative journey. What does that mean? Well, I'm going to tell you. So I think, my content here is geared towards creative awakening and finding that place in you that is coming alive creatively. That can happen at an organizational level, that can happen interpersonally, that can happen within you. Creative awakening can mean so many different things in so many different contexts. What my sweet spot is, though, is finding that place that comes to life within you and nurturing that. Some people might call it inner child stuff. I might call it shadow work, what have you. But I find that the Alchemical Book Club for me is giving you tools that help you do that. There's other content that I'm developing based on my personal experiences. So that's going to be super exciting. That's coming as well. But for the purpose of this book club, I thought, you know what? I want to put together tools that give you an immediate jump at really integrating these lessons. And also integrating things to do with, like, for me, the astrological calendar is something that allows me to pause and reflect. And I was thinking about the Libra full moon coming up on April 16th, I want to say. The 16th? Yes. It took a minute, but and the reason why I tend to move through these cycles and with the seasons as well are very important to me. I think about it because it gives me a way to earmark different reflection points, right? So Libra full moon would be about relationships. It's about connecting with other people. It's about balance and the quality of the relationships, not just the quantity. It is about boundaries in those relationships relative to being an Aries season, which is a sign about I, me, my, right? So all of these things, people might, look at it a little bit differently and be like, oh, astrology. Ugh, I thought you were smart. And it's like, well, I am. And I think it's also about looking inward too, right? And it's always funny to me because people think about astrology as being like all out there and airy, like all airy, blah, right? Like just meh. But if I was doing a Bible study, people would probably applaud it. So I think it's such an interesting dichotomy, and it really reveals a lot about what space we have for creativity and creatives, right? How much space do we make? So that's maybe something else to think about. But relative to this episode of the book club, I was thinking about the Libra full moon and relationships and our quality of them and how we show up in them and how we balance ourselves in them. And I was thinking about this book in particular. I read it 2 years ago. I got it at the beginning of the year and read it, and then I read it again later in the year, and it was really great. Like, it was an excellent book, so I thought, why not share it with other people? It's not some secret sauce, but it'll definitely help. So The Art of Holding Space, A Practice of Love, Liberation, and Leadership by Heather Plett. I read all of that backwards. I'm so impressed with myself. But this book is phenomenal. We talk about and think about holding space in terms of, I've heard it used differently. It's just like paying attention to how others feel and all of that stuff. But what I love about this book is that it provides real insight into liminal spaces. And what does that mean? So the book articulates liminal spaces is where we need to hold space for others the most. That is basically where we're kind of at an in-between place where we're feeling things like grief. We're deep in shadow work is basically how I view it. You can be deep in grief. For myself, transitioning was a huge liminal space, right? Like, my voice is still changing and still getting deeper. My cowlick is having a great day though, let me tell you. But like, these types of things, right? I'm starting to get a little bit of like facial hair. You can kind of see it, but that's going to be changing as I grow more, right? My face shape is still changing. This is an example to put out there just so that it helps to articulate and conceptualize what the liminal space for folks may mean, right? It's where you're feeling one thing and you're becoming something else through the feeling or in other ways, and you're not there yet. And this is a practice of holding space in the sense of making peace with where someone wants to be and where they are, and where you may want them to be and where they are, right? So it's a beautiful way to really look at connection and relationships, and just interpersonal relationships in general, not just romantically and things like that. It's how do we hold space for other people? How do we show up when they're in the in-between spaces, right? This is a core component of creativity in my mind too, because a lot of the time we are our most creative, and we are the most open-hearted. To me, creativity is deeply related to being open-hearted and open to the world around us, be that in nature or, in any way. For me, it happened through nature. That's how I dealt with a lot of things and processed them. And it's just also this enduring connection too with my synesthesia. But what I see here is this capacity. We live in a world of liminal space right now, right? We really do. A lot of our world is liminal. There's nothing that's sure. And when we lean into some things that we think are certain, we are disabused of the notion. We are disabused of the notion that anything is certain, which can be really scary. It can be really tempting to shut down. And what I loved about this book is that it really gave a path through how to show up for others and ourselves as well, right? To get our own needs met and make sure that we're meeting our needs before we meet other people's needs, because we can't really, right? So the way that the book defines holding space is holding space is what we do when we walk alongside a person or group on a journey through liminal space. We do this without making them feel inadequate, without trying to fix them, and without trying to impact the outcome. We open our hearts, offer unconditional support, and let go of judgment and control. So it's really phenomenal. Like it's a phenomenal look at how to do that. It gives you some different tips and pointers. It defines liminal space in a really deep way. It kind of does a deep dive into that. Thinking about like disappointment and how do we process it? How do we look at disappointment when it happens? How do we frame it in the context of who we want to be when disappointing things happen to us, or sometimes because of us to other people, right? Like, how do we balance all of these things? And that's a liminal space too. So they define it here. Heather Plett, the author, defines it as liminal space is a period in which something, social hierarchy, culture, belief, tradition, identity, etc., has been dissolved and a new thing has not yet emerged to take its place, i.e. the journey your friend makes through grief from expectant mother to a new identity as a childless mother after suffering a miscarriage, right? So this is where we find ourselves in the shadow. But if we think about what's been going on with the pandemic, and if we think about what's been going on in the context of the war in Ukraine, and, a lot of the things that my community is even facing in the States, and a lot like racial injustice has been a thread through all of this too. Like this is, I mean, we talk about these, like the pandemic is an event. The war in the Ukraine it's an event, but I feel like that's not the right way to word it. But like racial injustice is like overarching all of these, right? So these are liminal spaces. And it's really, like it talks about how we sometimes hear about it on social media as like just listening and showing up, but there's a bigger component to it specific to the liminal space. And for me, that's where shadow work comes into play. Is like, I think that a lot of us are being called to kind of do shadow work, or our shadow is on display in ways that we can't really do anything about because it's just visible. And it can be really painful to be exposed in that way and vulnerable, because people can see a lot of the hurts that you have without you really having to share them because of what's going on in the world. And that, not all of us is on display. But I think that it can make our relationships balanced or imbalanced depending on how we handle that liminal space and how we are capable of holding space. And it's beyond just being able to listen to other people, right? So the author talks about a spiral pathway through like complexity of emotional states. I won't hold it up for too long, but it talks about like from where you were to where you are, and there's this whole journey that you go on, right? There's this whole journey that you take through it. I highly recommend reading the book, and I recommend this here because it is an excellent book, and they break down what it is that holding space means. Like, what do you need, right? And it talks about you offer a container. So they use the analogy of a cup, right? They use the analogy of a cup and a bowl shape. So, you offer witness, containment, compassion, non-judgment, guidance, space for complexity, autonomy, flexibility, connection, allyship. All of these things are offered. I won't go into great detail about all of them because I do want you to read the book. But it causes you to really think a little bit differently about what holding space is, because there's a way that you have to kind of, you set aside a lot of the things that you would normally do in conversation with others. And this isn't just like a counseling related practice. I mean, although I do recommend, if you are a counselor watching this, or if you do any kind of coaching and you are watching this, I would recommend reading this book, because it really gives you insight into how to really see other people, right? Glennon Doyle talks a lot in her books about being held and free. And when I was reading this book initially, I didn't have that verbiage for it necessarily, but for me, it was, you really see it jumping off the page as like, this is how we hold people and set them free, because we don't need to fix the situation, but we also want to show up for people that we care about without dismissing them because life is difficult or hard, right? So this book is great at doing that and kind of giving you a roadmap to it. And I think that there's reflection questions in here that are fantastic as well. Those are on page 106. And it's also looking at trust, like how do we build trust with ourselves and others? And the author, so Heather calls it Psychic Membranes in Relationship. That's a chapter title. I highly recommend reading that chapter. It's fantastic. Psychic Membranes in a Relationship. And it looks at the boundaries around each membrane, as it were, that we represent and that we put into the world, and how sometimes they can do this. And thinking about it in that context, really, I'm a visual person, so I loved all of the imagery that was through it. Throughout the book, but it's this idea of like when an idea or someone's experience invades your psychic membrane, it makes it hard to hold space. And that is also where the author provides tools to become better at this, to become very skilled at it, right? And it is something like a muscle. We do have to work with it in order to strengthen it in ourselves, because I think that culturally speaking, we haven't really been prepared in the best way to hold space for others, because I think that, we're often reducing one another to hashtags, or how effectively we serve one another in terms of like, do I get what I want from you? And that's really like, it's not great, right? Like it's just a little bit icky, but that's a lot of the way that we operate though, right? Like as a collective. I think that we are shifting some of this for sure. But the psychic membranes in relationship is really like, yeah, this is what the author depicts as like a healthy balance, right? Nobody's spilling into other people. And it's, it can easily be conceptualized in terms of like fences and neighborhoods and all of that stuff. But I love the way that this author outlines it as psychic membranes, because it's not just people coming into your space. It's also emotions that people leave you with. When you hold space for someone, you're holding space for their hard. You're holding space for the difficult, right? For some of the shadow. And I'm not saying stay in those places, but this is really important in terms of alchemizing what's happening within you. Creatively speaking, that allows you to continue to, I want to say move forward, but not progress-wise. It really just allows you to connect with people in a more deep way that enhances your creativity, because it also is a good way for you to meet with yourself. Right? When you have compassion for yourself in the way that you have compassion for other people, that's when a lot of creative processes really start to take off. And that's what allows even organizations to integrate creative practices within their four walls. So that is a huge, huge deal. And it also talks about trust and how we develop trust through this process. The book also goes into, it details something called the spiral of authenticity. And it's sort of they focus on the spiral and labyrinth structure, because it's sort of, it's kind of an awakening of the understanding of nonlinearity. Nonlinearity? I feel like that's a word, but we'll go, it's fine. It's a focus on the nonlinear and how that can show up. And I picked up this book around the same time that there was Soulful Revolution was talking on her channel about doing spiral dynamics and stuff, and I picked up this book and I saw it and I was like, well, shit, that's like, it's one of those synchronicities where you're like, this is important to pay attention to right now. I've already read the book, but rereading it again, like certain books I buy, not because I like having full shelves. That does look beautiful. It does look nice, but I buy them so that I can revisit them a couple times over. And I usually do if I have the book and I've purchased it. And this is one that was quite like that. and it talks about, how do we hold space for time during times when our own needs aren't met, but we need to do that for others. And if you have a business too, if you own a business, this is important to keep in mind, because sometimes if you're doing coaching, if you're coaching people with your business, or if you have clients of any kind, how do you hold space for them when you're running on empty, right? It looks at how to set boundaries around that, and it provides a real constructive way forward. And then it also talks about how to strengthen the container, and it focuses on mindfulness and detachment as a route to doing so. And it talks about, how do we handle conflict within that, and it makes the distinction between brave spaces and safe spaces. And it talks about how safe spaces are amazing, but brave spaces are brave spaces are where we can get uncomfortable and we can be comforted in discomfort. And it also takes away expectations and notions that we have about how things should be. And it also allows us to really to sit with the energy of brave as opposed to safe. Not that they have to be in opposition, but in the way I look at it is that sometimes we create safe spaces, and brave spaces encourage us to grow wings, right? It encourages the transition from story A to story B and moving through all of that. So that's where the holding space piece comes in, for me at least, when it comes to work that I've done and even with myself. And it talks about, when we hold space, we create a container for liberation, direct quote. When we hold space, we create a container for liberation. And that's really what this process is about, right? And I think about, liberating folks creatively. That's what I really like to do. That's what I did before I went to grad school. That's what I've done so many times. It's like people would look at me as the ideas person, but it really helped to spark a lot of other people's creative inspiration too, right? And it wasn't really, I didn't think much of it until I sat back and I was like, well, that's something I really enjoy doing. And tarot's one way that I do that, but this is a whole other ballgame. So this book is phenomenal. I highly recommend it. Absolutely recommend it. If I'm being completely honest, again, if you have a coaching practice, this can apply to large organizations. The principles can be scaled up. The principles can also be scaled down, right? It's really, if you're a facilitator, if you do workshops, if you do anything like that, this book I think is excellent. And I also think that this is important in terms of holding ourselves and recognizing that we deserve to have space held for us while we navigate liminal spaces. So that book is one that I would read for sure. I was so excited to feature it on the Alchemical Book Club because it's been really helpful, and I hope that it helps you as well. If you liked this video, please feel free to like and subscribe. It's free. It's free. Free 99 is the best price, let me tell you. So it's free to do, and it helps me to grow the channel and to know that content like this resonates. So with that being said, there's other content offerings that I do on here that kind of touch on different spirituality things. So tarot for me, integrating some astrology, evolutionary astrology at that. And there's also taking a deep dive into different spiritual concepts related to the creative unconscious, which I see as the shadow. So do take a look at all of that. But if we part here, my friends, my Alchemical Book Club friends, I hope you have a wonderful evening, morning, noon, or night, wherever you find yourself on the time-space continuum. Take care, and thanks for watching. Bye. Woo.